That's how I lived. 60 years. I served at the Institute no more and no less than 60 years. I started as a laboratory assistant because I had no money. It was the only place to go, and by that time I needed to provide for my mother. I accepted the position. The professor was an extraordinary person. He told me, "You will pursue science." And he gave me a PhD right there and then.
We began shooting this film in February 2002. Valentina Puzik was 99 years old at the time. She was a professor, a doctor of science, a researcher of tuberculosis. But her life was dedicated to more than science. She had a secret which she carried with herself for the entire 20th century. Valentina came to the Institute of Tuberculosis in the first years of the Soviet era. Her supervisor was the well-known medical researcher Vladimir Shtevko. After the death of her teacher, she led the academic community. Everyone here in the laboratory are Valentina students.
She is a preeminent scientist not only in the fields of tuberculosis and physiology, but also in age-specific morphology. We shall always remember that Valentina was able to find a few warm words for everyone.
She carefully selected the studies and the laboratory staff members. She found me at another institute. She looked over my master's thesis and said, "Now this is what we need today."
She sat me close by and said, "What do you really want to do?" That's when I began doing research, the blood vascular system. Yes, she would say, "I respect each employee's opinion, even those of people as young as you are. It is very good that you have chosen this field for yourself."
She was always sharing new ideas, things that could be the thesis for a dissertation for clinicians. She showed us how to look at things from other angles, and Vladislav Vsevolodovich would sit at these lectures and say, write it down, get your pencil out so that you can share this with someone, a new student."
My father worked for the railway. We lived modestly, but everything went very well for us. But one day, my father became seriously ill, and he passed away in 1915. I was 12 years old then, and my brother was 10. All of this took place right before the revolution.
Revolution, the collapse of an old regime, old foundations. They say, heaven forbid that you should live under times of changes and historical upheaval.
At that point, some real upheaval was taking place. We were a religious family, like the others, but were in need of some help from God. I started looking for a church. At this time, a friend of mine from my parish told me, "Valentina, there are some elders here. The elders have arrived in Moscow."
The elders, holy men, and monks, driven away by the new government, had arrived from Zosimov Monastery. The spiritual traditions were deeply rooted at this monastery, tucked away deep in the woods. In Russia, this faith is called starchestvo. The holy men received the gift of prophecy, trusting one's life to an elder, living by his recommendations. A spiritual son lives by the will of God. These views could make even the smallest affairs into great Christian deeds. Father Herman, the Father Superior of the Zosimov Hermitage, was called Mother by his monks. The laymen, common people of all orders and degrees, were drawn to the elder. They would come from all parts of Russia seeking advice on how to live and how to know God's will. But the harmony was broken. In 1923, Father Herman had passed away. Soon the new government expelled all the monks from Zosimov Monastery. This is the road traveled by the holy men who followed God's will. Vysokopetrovsky Monastery in Moscow became a shelter for many of them.
In 1924, I went to Vysokopetrovsky Monastery. It was a spacious, dark temple. I entered and looked for an elder who was recommended by a friend of mine. They told me he was sick, but that I could speak with another father. They said, "Go to him, he is good." I walked towards the choir space. I had very beautiful curly hair. Probably it was the only pretty thing about my face. I remember that just taking my hat off made me feel freer, more at ease. I approached him and began to speak to him. I was surprised that the father began to ask about the details of my family. I was surprised and could not understand why he was asking these things. But I answered all of his questions and left satisfied.
That was her first meeting with Elder Ignacy from Zosimov Monastery.
Lent began, and I went to church rarely. The father noticed that I rarely came to church. I told him I was very busy. Gradually, he led me to become more engaged with my inner self. He gave me a rosary. "Father, what should I do with it?" He answered, "You pray with the rosary." I tied them around my waist, and I felt strangely happy because I had a secret. I had a rosary on my belt, and I was not like the others.
At that time, others were passionately propagating the morals of a new society. Freedom in one's private life was expressed in slogans such as "Freedom to winged eros" and "We shall release women from familial servitude." Communities such as Down with Shame and family-based communes were established. One of the results of this movement was that by 1927, there were 500,000 homeless children in Russia.
In 1926, I was offered a job at the Institute of Tuberculosis. I took it, and I wasn't afraid of tuberculosis, because I had the Father's blessing.
Then tuberculosis was seen as an incurable illness, and only the most selfless people were struggling against it. People of faith, almost all of them got sick and tried the medicines on themselves, but none of them gave up. Their religion was a science. They believed in it, they lived by it. Nobody knew that Valentina, one diligent laboratory assistant, had a secret.
Every evening I went to church. I would come home from my work, drop my bag, and run to Petrovsky Monastery. We would go there for confession or for conversation, and this way Father learned about us.
According to the traditions of the elders, confessing your sins was not enough. They would also speak of the new thoughts and intentions that had formed in their hearts. Father Ignacy would say,
"You must always be aware of your thoughts. Most importantly, your heart should be pure and meek."
Father Ignacy was on the lookout for the souls aspiring to a spiritual life, those who were ready to follow Christ to the end, even to Golgotha. He would lead to monastic vows.
I took my monastic vows in 1928. The Father was strict. He only conferred vows in liturgy. Vows were not necessarily taken in a church, as they are very simple and short.
In Orthodoxy, there are 3 grades of the prophest. The first is preparatory, the second, when a nun receives her robe, and when she takes vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience. The third is for a schema, where she renews her vows. With every grade, a nun is christened anew with a different name. At the first stage, Valentina was rechristened Varsonovi of Kazan by Father Ignacy.
The Father said, "It is not worth donning robes on the laity, because they become ensnared by their robes and slide into sin."
In May of 1929, the Soviet powers closed down the Vysokopetrovsky Monastery. In the streets of Old Moscow, the nun found a place for the secret monastery. Here in this house, in its attic. Here Valentina and her spiritual sisters came to pray and speak. A small window opened a view of the Petrovsky Monastery. As he climbed up the stairs, Father Ignacy once compared the wide, worldly road with the narrow and steep ladder that he called the monastic road. The country at the time was lively and cheerful. They were preparing for a war with the capital of the world. With a firm step and in solid formation, the people of the Soviet superpower walked before Stalin, their leader and teacher.
The Father was deprived of any opportunity to attend church, and he had been sentenced to house arrest. By that time, his aged mother had passed away. He couldn't even accompany her to church and parted with her at home. Then, in the spring of 1935, they came for the Father.
Father Ignacy spent all of the years of his imprisonment in infirmaries and clinics and was barely able to move on his own. Yet he wrote letters in which he continued to support his spiritual children. Each of Father Ignacy's letters began with a symbol that was well known both to him and to Valentina. Its translation from Latin meaning, "Be with God."
Sometimes he wrote his letters in Greek, sometimes he wrote in Latin. I could understand both and translated them to all the sisters, explaining what he wrote.
Kept with the grace of God, I am alive and healthy at a new place, where your mother lives.
Father Ignacy often called himself Mother, as was the long-established tradition at Zosimov Monastery.
May peace attend to you and bless you on the bright night of the Easter 1935. I crave croutons.
The croutons we wanted, sukhariki in Russian, were brought to him as a form of communion. He had set them aside, but it happened that they were stolen. In the prisons, it seems, the thieves even stole bits of hardened bread.
I remembered Zosimov Monastery and Petrovsky Monastery as pictures of a past long ago. But if this is God's will, I also accept and abide by this gloomy present.
His last letter sounds as his will. May peace attend to those who are far away. May peace attend to those close by. May peace be with everyone caring for this world.
Father passed away on the morning of the commemoration of the martyr deaths of St. John the Baptist.
Artist Paul Koren drew a portrait of Father Ignacy. The image of the holy man was meant to feature in a grandiose work of art entitled "Leaving Russia." But making this religious artwork in an atheist country was impossible. The Zosimovsky monks were cared for by the spiritual children of Father Ignacy, one after another. After the arrest of Father Ignacy, Father Nikita became their spiritual father. And later, there was Father Zosima and Father Isidore.
He served near Moscow. We would visit him. He was our spiritual father. Sometimes he would even smack us on the head. All sorts of things happened.
The spiritual daughter who submissively received the occasional smack on the head was already a professor and a world-renowned scientist by this time. The science was obedience, for which Father Ignacy had blessed her. When all of the employees go home, she stays late to pray. Some of the other women would pray with her, her laboratory assistants, some of whom were also secret nuns. Shortly after Father Ignacy passed away in Stalin's camps, Valentina took her monastic vows and was rechristened Ignatia. She kept Father Ignacy's robe in memory of her spiritual teacher.
An elder sister gave his robe to me because it belonged to me in his name. I still do not know how the Lord saved me, and I was not sent to the camps. It might be that I had many students, and my work was important for the Institute. I don't know.
Certainly, she could not advance above a laboratory manager because she was not a member of the party.
It is possible to work and to teach the youth as much as you would love to, and I always had many pupils.
At scientific conferences and symposiums, Professor Puzik would amaze all of them with her brilliant presentations. She had traveled to many countries and studied 6 languages. Nobody suspected about her experience as a nun. It is difficult to imagine the secret kept by this charming lady in black glasses.
I was not a beauty, and I never had suitors. But I met some people with scientific views similar to mine. I had many male friends, but nobody ever tried to kiss me. Valentina was tough.
У нас была директорша, коммунистка, очень убежденная, но...
I was invited to France. They were interested in my research.
Потому что интересны были мои исследования, и меня приглашали как специалиста.
But my director, a devoted communist, said she may not leave alone.
Друзья некоторые слышали такой разговор. Ее нельзя пустить одну.
So, I was accompanied by a communist, a wonderful person, an expert in microbiology. He used to say, "Valentina, you go to your church and I'll go to mine."
Valentina Puzik discovered new trends in tuberculosis research. Modern science has only recently accepted her many brilliant theories. Mother Ignatia recently shed light on another of her secrets. She has shared her manuscripts, which she has kept in her desk drawer for half a century. These are theological works. Her first book is called The Life of Father Ignaty.
I began writing about Father Ignaty in 1945.
Based on this book, Father Ignaty was canonized in 2000. On Saturdays, Mother Ignatia teaches at a church school at an Orthodox house of worship. A year has passed since filming began on this documentary. In February 2003, Valentina Puzik celebrated her 100th birthday at the Institute.
So, thanks to you, my friends. Warm regards from my already 100-year-old heart to all of you for your work.